Hey everybody, welcome back to All Fiction is Fantasy. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. And in today's video, we are going to return to the Sword and Sorcery saga. And I am going to review the first three books in the Swords of Raemllyn series. And this series are the Swords of Raemllyn. I think it's just Raemllyn, Raemllyn, the Swords of Raemllyn series. And that is by Robert E. Vardaman and Geo W. Proctor. And this entire series, at least the first six books, were originally published in 1985 to 1986. So the editions that I read are the Ace Fantasy books, and the three books that we'll be covering today are To Demons Bound, and each one of these books has a cover by Luis Royo. So we have To Demons Bound, which is book one. We have book two here, A Yoke of Magic. And we have book three, The Blood Fountain. Now, there are three other volumes in the original six-volume series, and there was also an additional trilogy that was published about 10 or so years later. Though that additional trilogy was never released in this Ace paperback format, and I'm probably not going to cover it. I've heard that book six in the original series provides a satisfactory ending, and because the covers clash and because they were never published in this format, I just don't really want to own those, and I don't like it when a series clashes on my shelf. I like when I have a uniform series. So that's why I'm only going to be covering the first six. So this is a weird series for me in that I have really enjoyed my time with it, and I am eagerly anticipating the next three. As a matter of fact, I'm going to start book four today as of the recording of this video, but I do have a hard time recommending it. And I'm hoping that through this kind of casual chat, this casual discussion slash review, maybe I can reconcile those conflicting positions with you. I'm not sure. It's weird. It's like, if I'm enjoying them, why can't I recommend them? And I'm kind of struggling with that dichotomy there. So the reasons why I enjoyed them are as follows. Number one, they made me ask the question that all great plot-focused fiction should, and that is, what happens next? Constantly throughout the first three books, I literally ask myself, like, what the heck is going to happen next? Because there are a lot of just kind of random events. It kind of feels like a plot generated by rolling on random event charts when you are playing a dungeon crawl board game or a solo RPG, and that is something that I really do like. I like the way that they're plotted. There is an ongoing narrative, but the way it unfolds is organic and kind of meandering. A single task or quest puts the overall plot into motion, but from there, things just kind of happen as our protagonists handle one challenge after another. It's a really interesting way to plot this series, and I think that's why it does fit into the overall genre of sword and sorcery and not epic fantasy. These don't feel like standalone novellas that have been touched up to work in a novel form. These were definitely written as novels, and they feel like that. There is an ongoing story arc throughout the series, but it's not a grand story arc. The stakes are kept pretty low. We rarely shift points of view away from the three main protagonists, and thus we are rarely given a glimpse as to the machinations of the antagonists. And point four, as a matter of fact, by the end of book three, I still don't even really know who the main antagonists are, what their plot is, and I think that's kind of cool. We are discovering things along with the characters. The reader is kept in the dark along with the characters as to what is really going on in the background. And I have a feeling that was kind of a having your cake and eating it too situation with the authors, because maybe they didn't really know what was going on as well, and they were discovering it as they were writing it, and they just kind of kept pushing ahead. And sometimes that can work, sometimes that doesn't work. But I think in the case of the Swords of Raemllyn, it works. So let's talk about book one first, and that is Two Demons Bound. I'm just going to read the synopsis here. The quest begins. Daven Anane and the giant Goran One-Eye were adventurers and freebooters until Goran killed two men in a gambling parlor. Now Daven stands captive before Veldin, the rat-like emperor of Bristonia's thieves, while Goran is cruelly tortured in a nearby chamber. Veldin will free Goran if Daven returns Veldin's kidnapped niece, Lyanna, to Bristonia. Now, I think it's Lyanna. That's the way that I'm pronouncing it. It's spelled Lijen, but I think Lyanna just doesn't sound good, so I'm pronouncing it Lyanna. It's a made-up name as far as I know. I can pronounce it how I want. Daven thinks the mission will only be a short adventure. Instead, it is the beginning of an odyssey peopled with sorcerers, slave traders, gypsy caravans, and the most dreaded demons of all, the Faceless Ones. So that's a really good synopsis there. That's basically everything that happens in this book. So the book does introduce us to our three main protagonists, and then it gets the snowball rolling. And I think I could describe the plot as snowballing, something that starts small, and as it's rolling down this hill, it kind of gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So we have our three main characters. We have Daven Anane, and Daven Anane is a svelte, swashbuckling, kind of thief-like character. And then we have his companion, Goran One-Eye, a more brutish, kind of barbaric thief with bright red hair. Yes, if you're thinking Fafhrd and Grey Mouser, you're right on track. I am sure that they were a major influence on this work. And our third protagonist is Lyanna, a young woman who gets tangled up in this mess and pays the price for it of cruelty from almost every man in her life. Hers is a tragic story, and we'll touch a little bit more upon that later. So the catalyst for everything, as the book described, is this underground card game, and Goran catches a couple of mage thief-like characters cheating, and he kills them. Then he gets captured by the Emperor of Thieves, who dwells in the subterranean sewers of this city. And this guy named Veldin, he holds Goran hostage, and he is threatening to torture him for a very long time in very disgusting and brutal and violent ways, unless Daven can go and rescue Lyanna, who the thief emperor claims is his kidnapped niece. And so that's kind of like, I guess you could say, no good deed goes unpunished, because Daven agrees to go on this quest, and then all kinds of stuff happens. So Daven pretty easily, pretty quickly accomplishes his quest, but he soon learns that he has been bamboozled. Goran does get released, and he, along with Daven, continue their quest to right Daven's wrongs. And this is basically the setup for the plot and what gets everything going in motion. But what about poor Lyanna? What about this kidnapped woman? Her part in this tale can be a difficult one to read, especially in this first book, in Two Demons Bound. She gets kidnapped, tortured, raped, brutalized, sold into slavery, and eventually possessed by a demon. There's one chapter right in the middle, I think it's chapter 11 or 12, that does get quite nasty, and it was very difficult for me to read. It doesn't go into great detail about the things that are happening to her, but what is suggested is nasty and very hard to read, unfortunately. By the end of book 3, though, I realized that all of this unpleasantness directed towards Lyanna was really just kind of brute force, blunt character development. Throughout the first 3 books, she is keeping a list of all the men who have wronged her. And there's at least one point in each of the books where she says to herself, I am going to get revenge on each one of these men. And I really, really hope she does. She deserves it. And I hope the authors end up treating her with the respect that she deserves, and she is allowed to get some retribution and some revenge and some peace in her life, because, man, she is put through hell, especially in this first book. So just know that going in, there are some rough patches in this book. There are some rough patches in general to how women are treated. They're constantly called whore and slut and bitch, and the men are kind of never called any comparable names. So just to know that going in. But I think I have some trust in the authors that they are going to allow Lyanna to get the revenge and the retribution that she needs. So each book pretty much picks up exactly where the previous volume ends. I get the sense that all 6 were probably written within a year of each other, and then just kind of chopped up into 6 volumes. And their small size is one of their great strengths. Each volume is right around 200 pages, with volume 1 being the longest at 214 pages. Each one has about 22 chapters. They're fast-paced, they're to the point. The story is told with brevity, but without feeling rushed. And these are really just kind of plot-focused books. And so if you're looking for a kind of like rip-roaring adventure with lots of daring do and lots of thievery and swashbuckling and sword fights and magic, then you might want to check out Two Demons Bound. Just know some of those issues going in. But Two Demons Bound ends with Lyanna being possessed by this demon, and she takes off. And then we are into book 2. The Yoke of Magic, or A Yoke of Magic. And in this book, we have Daven and Goran. They are going off to try to find Lyanna, who has taken off in this demon-possessed rage. So one thing that book 2 does is it starts to explore the nature of Goran One-Eye a little bit more. We learn very early in book 1 that Goran is actually not a human. He is this kind of shape-changing being called a Challing. Challings are a race of shape-changing aliens from another dimension, and he was sucked into the world of the books, into the world of Raemllyn, and trapped in the body of a man called Goran. So, but towards the end of book 1, Goran actually does drink this magic potion, and it kind of begins to unlock some of his innate abilities, some of his magical powers. I get the feeling that this plot device was done mostly as a kind of get out of jail free card for the authors, because more than a few times, Goran's newly surfacing magical powers manifest just in time to save the day, just in the nick of time. He kind of becomes the author's deus ex machina. However, he also regains his ability to do some basic shape shifting. And this is where the two authors explore a subplot with some nuance that I didn't think they were capable of. You see, the Challings are gender fluid. They don't have a set gender. They can shift to become male or female or any combination thereof. One of their passions, one of the things that this race enjoys doing is experiencing various sexual encounters in different configurations of gender. So Goran learns to shapeshift into the form of a beautiful woman, a very busty woman, and there's lots of discussion on women's bust in this series. It's very typical of sword and sorcery, so again, know that going in. But because he's friends with Daven, he wants to seduce Daven as this female form and experience sex with Daven as a human woman. It's one of the things that his ancestry likes to do, but Daven isn't having it. And it was here that I thought the book was going to kind of sink into that kind of typical kind of 80s transphobia, homophobia. And I was kind of prepared for the cringe, and maybe I don't want to read this if it goes too far into that. However, the subject is actually handled with a little bit of panache and a little bit of nuance. I was quite surprised. Daven explains to Goran that he's just not into that because he thinks of Goran as a male, as his male friend. And it's just not something that he is comfortable with experiencing with Goran. But Goran postulates that if he had met Daven in the form of this beautiful woman, that Daven might have wanted to go to bed with him. And David concedes that point, but reiterates that that is not what happened, that he can't get over that. Daven then requests that Goran never try to trick him or deceive him in the shape of a woman, and Goran does agree. David and Gorn are both scoundrels. They're thieves, they're thugs, and womanizers, but they do have this kind of subtle code of ethics. And throughout books 2 and 3, they do actually grow a bit, and I do really appreciate that. Book 2 also introduces a minor antagonist slash protagonist, a guy called Berenices the Blackheart, who has a history with David. And Berenices is also in possession of this magical sword. And he is on a quest to find the sword's matching sheath. And when those two things are combined, the sword will grow in power, and it will be able to stand up against these demons called the Faceless Ones, who are once again on the prowl. The quest for the sheath becomes a major plot point, as does the rumor of this magical device, this magical MacGuffin called the Blood Fountain, which could be the source of the Faceless One's power. And that brings us to book 3, the Blood Fountain. There it is. The MacGuffin is in the title. We have a title. We have a MacGuffin. The Blood Fountain. The Blood Fountain is actually really cool. The way that they use the Blood Fountain to dispose of the main antagonist in that book is really creative, and I ended up liking it quite a bit. So I think Volume 3 is the best of the first 3, and I wouldn't say by far, but it is the best. It has, I think, the most excitement, especially the final third. It's as close to great sword and sorcery as any of these 3 books will get, and it's pretty damn great. So the book details the journey of the still demon-possessed Lyanna, who has joined forces with Berenices. Berenices is on the quest for his sheath, for his sword, and he tricks Lyanna into joining him by promising to look for a sorcerer who can exorcise the demon from her. But what he's actually using her, he knows that she is being drawn to this evil sorcerer that he wants to get to. So he's kind of using her as bait, or kind of using her as a living compass to get to where he wants to go. Once again, Lyanna is used and abused and betrayed by all of the men in her life. They end up getting this group of adventurers with Lyanna and with Berenices. They end up getting enslaved and captured by these demonic bird-like men who take on this illusory appearance of angelic gods. And man, that part is super cool. David and Gorn are hot on their trail. Gorn ends up rescuing the captives, and the group together arrive at the main sorcerer's hideout in this woods. The sorcerer is a guy called Raemllyn, and he's one of the greatest sorcerers in the land. And he puts this group of ragtag adventurers and warriors through a series of tests and challenges. And this part of the book is just fantastic. I absolutely love all of the things that Raemllyn forces them to go through. There's this giant earthworm thing with this maw of a mouth that has all of these teeth. And it actually, out of the blue, just comes in and bites one of the main characters' heads off. And just a blood spray erupts all over the place. It's really neat. And the way that they dispatch of the different tests and overcome everything is super cool. And that's really where the book gets into some very high level sword and sorcery. I really did like that. There's a few more crosses and double crosses. The Blood Fountain is discovered. Its power, it's a source of evil. Its sorcery is defeated, at least some of it. They learn a little bit more about the Faceless Ones. Lyanna maybe gets the demon exorcised, maybe not, but she ends up stealing the sword and she takes off again, plotting her revenge. And that's kind of basically where the Blood Fountain leaves off. And David and Gorn are asking themselves, what the hell just happened? What is going on? What is going to happen next? And I felt like that too. I am really excited to go into book 4. I read a book in between just because I didn't want to get burned out on one series, but I'm going to read 4, 5, and 6 now, and I'm hoping that they are just as good. So by the end of book 3, halfway through a 6-book series, I still don't really know what the overall plot is. I'm just kind of following along on these adventurers as they stumble from one challenge to the next. And I don't really care because the adventure so far has been a lot of fun. I think so far this series has been a great focus on what makes sword and sorcery fiction so compelling. Digest-sized, low-stakes adventures, while also weaving together an ongoing narrative in a larger work of fantasy. Each one of these books only took me a few days to read. I'm a pretty slow reader though, so I'm sure faster readers could blaze through one in a day or two. And at the end of each one, I couldn't wait to continue reading. I had to force myself to take a break after book 3 just so I won't get burned out. The books remind me of that kind of low budget fantasy media of the 1980s. It reminded me of movies like Beastmaster or Dragon Slayer, cartoons like Masters of the Universe, although not as good as the Warrior Witch of Hell trilogy, another series that reminded me of Masters of the Universe. And that's my favorite works of sword and sorcery ever. Or also television shows like Wizards and Warriors, if you guys remember that single series oddity that was in the early 80s. And they left me asking a question. Is it okay to spend so much time reading something that is merely entertaining? I know I could be reading books that are objectively better in every single way. Should I? Should I only read things that are considered the best? Or is it okay to carve out space in our lives for things that are merely okay? And I think the answer to those questions is really up to you. How do you want to spend your time? If you feel comfortable spending time just reading something that is entertaining and okay, then you might really enjoy this series. If you really value your time and you only want to spend your time diving into the very best examples of each genre or subgenre, you may want to pass these up. And so that's where these books, even though I'm liking them, that's why they are kind of hard for me to recommend. Personally, I've enjoyed the series a great deal. There are flaws. They're not very well written. They're serviceable. They're workmanlike in their quality. The characterization is blunt and somewhat forced. The women are mostly treated like crap. Magic is both the source of evil and a lazy source of good when it is needed. And things just kind of amble along without any kind of high stakes. But the points along the way are full of adventure, cool situations, gory violence, monsters, demons, magic swords, swashbuckling action, traps, trickery, double crosses, disaster, and triumph. And those are all things that I look for in great works of sword and sorcery, of good works of fiction, of good works of fantasy, of the kind of fantasy that I like to read. So, have you read this series? Let me know if you like it. Let me know how did I reconcile those two competing kind of feelings on this book, where on one hand, I am enjoying them and I am liking them and I can't wait to read more. But on the other hand, I'm having a hard time recommending them to you. So, all right, you guys, well, I hope you enjoyed this entry of the Sword and Sorcery Saga series. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.